Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. In today's roundtable segment, we'll discuss the latest in the hits that keep coming out of the Supreme Court, the approved state budget and what it means to Chicago, and the 900-page plan that could spell the end of democracy, known as Project 2025. Austin Weekly News reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez and the host of Munson Tonight, Ashley Munson, will join me to unpack and discuss. But first, I'll sit one-on-one with Chicago DNC Host Committee Senior Advisor Keiana Peyton-Barrett. We'll get started on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Rich Robbins, inviting you to join me for the series Soft and Tender. Soft and Tender celebrates the resilience and emotional depth of Black fatherhood, offering a powerful narrative on family bonds and ongoing challenges faced by Black communities.
As a father and as a parent in general, you have to know that you're not going to always understand, and that's okay.
Tune in on CAN TV, cable channel 19, or stream at cantv.org or the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
In just over 1 month, thousands of political leaders, community activists, and members of the international media will descend upon Chicago for the Democratic National Convention, an event that takes on even greater significance and international focus after the attempted assassination of former President Trump last week. Is Chicago ready for its close-up? And what's being done to ensure the safety of residents and political leaders, including the sitting president and vice president? Joining me now to discuss all things DNC is the Senior Advisor for the Chicago DNC Host Committee, Keiana Peyton-Barrett. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk with just some basics first. So what is the Chicago DNC Host Committee? What's the relation to actually running the convention?
Great question. So the local host committee is a 501c6 nonpartisan nonprofit entity that is tasked with all the community engagement that needs to take place to host the convention, as well as the Herculean task of raising the resources that are required in order to host an epic event. I also like to say that we are indigenous to Chicago. So we are here before the convention and we are here afterwards. So we have a vested interest to ensure that we approach this with a very keen eye to enterprise and engagement and making sure that the city realizes the major impact from this event.
Right. I'm sure that's really reassuring because I think sometimes people think just a horde of people comes in and a horde of people leaves, and they forget that the people who run it are from here. So tell us, what are you doing to put on to ensure that we're going to have a successful convention here?
So this has been a very pragmatic process from the very start. We knew that we were making history. Chicago has served as host to the most political conventions in history of any urban city. This will be the 26th time. And we're under the firm belief that is no coincidence, that it is a myriad of reasons that have gone into the selection. And one of our greatest commodities are the people of Chicago. And that is what we've used as our North Star to consider how do we put our residents at the center of this experience to make sure that they are able to leave their fingerprints on this wonderful opportunity. We recognize that this is a global opportunity for the city to shape its narrative, to really showcase all of our assets in an amazing way. So we've been very thoughtful about our procurement process, number one. We've been very keen on engagement of all 77 community areas of the city. We have also worked very closely with the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois and our Illinois congressional delegation just to make sure that we have a very robust and impactful experience for the visitors as well as the residents that are here.
Well, that's a lot.
That is quite a bit.
But let's talk first about procurement, because
Sure.
I know you've had a huge focus on minority, including an inclusive process and ensuring that opportunities that are coming from this convention are shared by all residents, and particularly minority contractors. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been doing that and what some of the outcomes are?
Sure. Andy, well, you will appreciate this very much because you recognize that the attacks on affirmative action and diversity really require us to be innovative and to see enterprise through a door versus just a keyhole. And so given that, we started with the process of how do we educate and inform the contracting community? Far too often, they are in the margins simply because not of talent or deficit in their abilities, but it's just a lack of information. So we hosted a round of engagement opportunities so they could learn about these opportunities. But at the same time, we recognize that there is a very finite amount of how should I say, specificity around some of the work. So we wanted to expose the minority contracting community to other firms because far too often minority firms are relegated to just subcontracting opportunities. And we wanted to make sure that they had an actual playing field in the prime landscape. And so through our development of a Business Diversity Advisory Council, which is comprised of over 20 advocacy groups from across the city and the state, they have served as our thought partner in devising a very meaningful, impactful, and measurable process. And we are proud to say that we are celebrating many firsts. The first contract that we awarded was to a local female-owned firm. The second was to the first African-American prime contractor in Expo Services.
Wow.
And what's important to us is not only inking first, but to make sure that these firsts are not the last. Right. And we want to create a legacy of opportunities and make sure that we showcase the fact that large-scale events that descend upon the city of Chicago really need to align with the talent that we have within our communities.
Right. And I think it's terrific because it is about creating opening the door of opportunity and letting people know. And when you do that, you have these incredible outcomes. So to have the event being run by a Black-owned company in terms of how that's going to be put on is a huge, huge thing.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about what this event's going to look like, because we obviously have some ideas, but there are a lot of people who haven't really paid attention to a convention or really know. How many people are coming here for this thing?
So we are anticipating over 50,000 visitors. That will include roughly 1,500 members of the media. Both local and national. And we recognize that the majority of the individuals will experience the convention through the lens or through the pen of reporters. Right. And so we're being very mindful and sensitive to that. At the same time, we will have delegates, roughly 5,500 coming from across the country. And we plan to serve as an amazing host to them, encouraging them to experience our fine city, the richness of our culture and our communities, and to really spur economic development. And one of the ways that we are doing that is by the development of a vendor directory, which we are circulating and advertising very broadly, because as these visitors descend upon the city, they will be planning events, they will need, various professional services, and we are encouraging them to lean into our directory for those needs. We also know that we cannot do this work in isolation. So we have had a very robust volunteer outreach and recruitment process. I was going to ask you about the volunteers, right? So it takes a lot to put on this show. It does.
So how many volunteers have you been recruiting?
So we just reached a major milestone last week of over 14,000 individuals have signed up from across the city and the state to leverage their time and talents for the purposes of the convention. And so we are very excited about that opportunity. We want to treat them with respect and kindness. I remember being a volunteer myself, so I realized just how critical and essential of a task that is. And so we're excited about that. And we also see that as another means of organizing, which is so critically important. So other organizations and entities that may need a volunteer corps, we plan to gift this list to them for future purposes as well.
These conversations always go so fast, so before we run out of time, I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
One is, what's the economic impact of the city, and you mentioned that you're raising money. What does it cost to put on a show like this?
So it is no small feat, to say the least. The Chicago Host Committee was tasked with raising upwards of $100 million. And that's the most raised that any host committee has been tasked with. And we approach that very strategically and very innovatively. Again, leveraging all of our allies and all of our resources to do that. And so we're very pleased with the success that we've made in that space. At the same time, we recognize that we want to see economic mobility left behind as a result of the convention. In previous cities, the average impact has been $150 to $200 million. And so we are already planning for the economic impact study that we will do that will outline exactly how we were able to impact the city. We'll be indexing zip codes so that we can specify exactly which communities were able to enjoy those benefits and how we can continue to spread the wealth.
Amazing. Well, I can't, as I said, time goes quick
Yes,
here.
it does.
But thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing for the city. Putting on a successful convention is really incredible. So it's incredible for the Democratic Party, but it's really important, obviously, to Chicago. So thank you for all the effort that you're putting in. I know your sleep time is getting less and less and less and less. And thank you so much for making time for me and for being with us here today. I really appreciate it
very much.
Thank you. And we will be right back after this short break.
On the next edition of The Compassionate Competitor, I'll sit in conversation with former NFL player and founder of Win Performance, Kerry Neal.
Everybody want it fast. Be willing to put the work in.
Join the conversation Thursday, July 25th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
The state has a balanced budget. Is the definition of balance being used loosely? Does Chicago get its fair share of the newly divided pie? And on the political front, the Supreme Court's latest decision that greatly expands the scope of presidential immunity appears to support the former president's efforts to snatch outside power for the executive branch of government. And while the Supreme Court has been ignoring decades of established law to wipe out previously protected rights for women and minorities, more than 100 conservative groups led by the Heritage Foundation unveiled a dystopian plan that doesn't bother to veil its goal of gutting America's fragile democracy once and for all. To help us take a closer look at this trifecta of pressing issues, I'm joined in the newsroom by regular contributors, Austin Weekly News reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez, and political pundit and the host of CAN TV's new original program, Munson Tonight, Ashley Munson. Welcome, ladies. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump right in. We've got a lot to cover. Let's start with the budget. So the state passed a budget, and it was kind of messy, right? They were there. They were fighting. There was a lot going on. But $400 million budget. But they have to generate. It's approved the budget, but they have to generate a lot of money to pay for it. I don't know. What do we think? Is it a good one for Chicago? Did the mayor get the $1 billion he went down there for schools or whatever? He asked for some money for schools, right?
Yeah.
Did he get it?
Well, according to my knowledge, I believe he asked for $200 million more than he actually got for CPS schools. So I think to the messy part of Springfield is messy. It's always messy.
It's always been messy.
It's been messy. When I was on staff, we would be in the Capitol till 12 o'clock plus in the morning trying to pass a budget, especially towards the end of session. So I think Republicans, when they say they crammed this 3,000 page plus legislation down their throats, it's a lot of things in there that folks weren't able to read. And so I think it's messy, but I do think it does some good things for schools in the state. It does a lot for MAP grants to provide for low income students. It provides money for early startup for childhood and things like that. So I think it's some pieces in there, but I think overall, the budget always needs work, and we have to take time to read through the actual legislation.
Right, but I think, my experience, that's not, to your point, not an unusual process.
Right.
And it was harder this time because there was less money to go around. I don't know, Francia, what are your thoughts?
I think something that needs to be addressed in the conversation is that there were a lot of, the current budget is based off last year's budget and prior year's budget, which have had an influx of funds from COVID relief and pandemic relief related federal funds. So there was about $16 billion coming from that. And then from last year, I think we had about $20 billion of unexpected tax revenue that was higher than anticipated. So this budget is higher, and many people have focused, I think, on that aspect of it, but we have to think of the COVID relief funds that came to the state and that were an opportunity for the state to use. Some of it was used to pay off debt, and Illinois has significant debt, so that was an important step. Some of it was spent to help people during the pandemic. So we had a little bit of a balance. That's something that needs to be considered. There is still, a deficit in the budget, as we've seen with many other agencies across the city and the state. It's not unusual because these funds, COVID relief funds, are running out. They're ending, and there will be deficits because we won't have that money. It's just inevitable.
Right. So let's move on to some more, probably more significant issues nationally. Obviously, the budget is important because it covers what's going to happen here in Illinois, but there are some longer term things afoot. So last week, the Supreme Court issued an opinion, the long-awaited opinion on whether or not former President Trump is entitled to immunity for his from prosecution for the crimes, particularly the crimes related to trying to overturn the election. And in what was really for many in the legal community a shocking decision, said that, he's entitled to an awful lot. And, I'm a lawyer, so I actually went and read, it was a long opinion, so I read most of it. But the real struggle there is that the scope of what they said is pretty broad. It's like for all of his official acts. So when you're in office, pretty much almost single thing you do is an official act, unless it's grossly outside of the scope of your responsibility. But of course, when you're the president, your responsibility is huge. And then secondly, they kind of made stuff up. I mean, basically they said, we're creating this because, we don't want the president to be infringed on, his ability to make decisions. I don't know, what was your initial reaction?
That the episode Scandals, like that it's come to life. Like we are living in a real TV show. But I think on a serious note, I think it makes me wonder who is exempt. And when we talk about Trump, how do we define an official act? What is an unofficial act? And as we see, I believe it was yesterday or this week, they talked about dismissing the case of classified documents against Trump. So we're starting to see the repercussions of what the Supreme Court has done and is doing. And this has been at play for a while. Talking about Roe, talk about affirmative action, like we're just chipping away at our rights. So I think we'll see some more repercussions as we get closer to the 2024 election, but I think we're in for a ride for sure.
Right. Francia, how about you? Initial reactions?
I mean, it's not good news for any democracy where there are supposed to be checks and balances and accountability from elected officials. That's the first thing that we want to see in a democracy. So I think there are two things that also add to it, and it's, there are different scenarios of what a president, Democratic or Republican, could do, right? And I think that's what's important for viewers to know too. Yes, it will benefit or affect Trump immediately, but down the line, whatever your affiliation is, it will cover all presidents, right? So it's setting a precedent for the future. The second thing is presidents have the ability to give pardons. So if they made a decision to give a pardon to someone who they ordered to do something that could potentially be illegal, they could issue a pardon to that person. So that's another thing that needs to be top of mind in the conversation, because we want to see a government that is balanced, but that has accountability. And when we remove those mechanisms for accountability and everyone's kind of like a free-for-all, and if you help the president, you can still get immunity, that's not a good thing for democracy in the United States, nationwide. And then that, that comes even to the states and the counties. It's just like a domino effect.
I think the other thing people are missing that I really would like to get your thoughts on is that let's not forget that the three of the people who voted for this opinion were appointed by Donald Trump, right? And so and so it does really feel like they went like, yeah, okay, don't worry, we'll take care of you. I mean, how does that feel like that they're willing to protect him?
Yeah, I think you highlight a really good point. Like, how we got here. And this is why I emphasize civics is super important, because it's beyond who's at the top of the ticket, but we vote these people into office and they make decisions that will affect our life for the rest of our lives. Like this court is stacked until or if the next appointment comes up.
And it's a lifetime appointment. That's the other thing I think people don't understand, right? That these individuals are on board for their lives.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on all these positive topics, let's move on to Project 2025. Can I get one of you to tell by the listeners today what Project 2025 is? I'll start with you, Francia.
Yes, so Project 2025 is a plan. It's a 900-page plan that is public, and that was put together by the Heritage Foundation, a think tank, a conservative think tank, influential think tank, who has alumni who was former, 3 alumni, I think, who were former members of Trump's cabinet in the 2020 presidential period, and who are still connected to now presidential candidate Donald Trump. The plan has very key points that take away some personal freedoms, that restrict abortion nationwide, and some other topics that, you know, we could spend hours diving into individually. It's a 900-page document, but it is a pretty significant document in terms of the Heritage Foundation saying, we hope this is the plan that will guide the presidential mandate in the upcoming mandate if Trump wins.
Yeah. So, why should people care? I mean, you know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff out there on the internet. Why should people care about Project 2025 in particular?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I like to start with telling people, like, this has been their policy Bible, the conservative movement policy Bible, since 1981, when Reagan was in office. And by the end of that year, 60% of this agenda was implemented. So this has been their plan for a long time. It just runs in parallel to the presidency. So if a conservative candidate gets in office, they have this policy, this manual, this Bible per se to follow. And I think everything from a gutting abortion rights. I mean, it even goes to the extent of prosecuting people that send abortion pills in the mail. I mean, from getting rid of sexual orientation to those who identify as transgender or other. And it just goes super far. And we've already begun to see things happen. And so I like to highlight that this is bigger than just who's on the ticket. This is our legacy and what America stands for. And though I am a Christian and I have views on a lot of things, however, this document is not what I think I stand for and I represent. So when we talk about conservatism and Christians, like, this is beyond, this is chipping away at people's rights that look like me, that look like you, that look like you, that look like some of the audience out there. So I think it's important to know that this is bigger than just 2 candidates. This is our children's children. Like, we're seeing life and legacy being chipped away. So I would start there. So many things we could talk about, like you mentioned, but I like to start there because this is bigger than what we're just looking at today.
Well, absolutely. And the policies and principles have been there, but I think there are also some things that are different about this plan. I mean, did you look at or read, kind of the pieces about enabling, really restructuring the government to better enable the president? I talked about earlier about the power of the executive office. Aren't there some things in there about basically solidifying power in the president's office and changing things?
Yes, there's some language around that. I think one of the important things is that we may think this is not going to happen, but we just talked about the Supreme Court ruling and how the president will get more immunity, and that's effective now. So it'll happen before the next president comes to office. So this is something that no matter, and I want to emphasize this to viewers, no matter what your political views are, if you understand civics and the concept of democracy and the concept of power division and having different branches of government, this goes against it. So that's what's very important for those who may have different views or may not fully understand it. That's what's really the takeaway. You are seeing plans to have a government that gives more power to the president and less power to other bodies of government. That's never a good thing. In any, history shows us, in any continent, in any country you go to, that is not a good thing. So, I think before we run out of time, let's just so we can highlight some things. I think we're going to be talking about this some more. Oh, wow. What are is there a piece that
troubles you the most, or
All
is
of
it at
it.
the top of your list? You said I know you've been
But,
reading it.
Yeah, everything in real life. But I think one thing that may resonate with a lot of folks is the Department of Education.
Absolutely.
It makes mention of getting rid of this. In addition to getting rid of some of the student loan payment programs, either limiting them or getting rid of them, and that affects a lot of people in this country, and not providing student loans for folks that want to go to college, that want a better life, that want to do the traditional way of life as far as it pertains to going to school. So I think that alone resonates with millions of people, and it's troublesome as somebody that needed student loans to go to college. My mom didn't have it like that, right? So now we're preventing the future generation from getting education that betters their future. So I think that is very alarming.
Agreed, and has much broader impacts. Things like school lunch programs that not just urban, children of color use, right? Rural people in the rural areas use. Issues for HBCUs and whether or not they'll even be allowed to continue to get funding and exist. So I think you're absolutely right. I think there will be more discussion to come, and as usual, my time with you goes way too quick, and has been really thoughtful and engaging. And we're going to come back to Project 2025 because I want people to understand what's at stake in this election. I'll be right back with my final thoughts on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Ashley Munson, and I'm inviting you to join me and my Chief of Staff, Justin James, and the band with no name for the next episode of Munson Tonight. Join the conversation Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org, or you can even try the new CAN TV Plus app. Hyper-local news and public affairs. Experience the power of community television.
When Donald Trump last held the office of United States President, he used his position and power to appoint federal judges to significantly impact and reshape the court system by appointing ultra-conservative and often underqualified judges to those lifetime roles. Among those appointments were 3 conservative judges to the United States Supreme Court. Those appointments shifted the court to a majority of conservatives, and that majority has been busy rewriting decades of settled law that protected the rights of women and minorities. They have overturned affirmative action. They overturned Roe versus Wade, which protected women's rights to make health choices for themselves, and they invalidated important sections of the Voting Rights Act. In short, they have been working hard to eradicate and eliminate legal protections for us, women and people of color. But they had no problems when called upon by the man who put them there to create new law to protect him. In a stunning decision, the court recently held that a president was almost wholly immune from prosecution for criminal conduct engaged in while he was president, greatly expanding the powers of the executive branch beyond anything ever done before. Justice Sotomayor describes the troubling effect of the decision in her dissent. She writes, "The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEALs Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune, immune, immune." Our current U.S. Supreme Court protect average citizens in this country? Nope. Protect a convicted felon facing 4 additional felony criminal prosecutions? Yup. And so, the main point I want to make to you today is that this degradation of our laws and our democracy is what happens when we do not vote. To protect our rights, we must use our rights. No excuses.